Story 1. Guy did a Gollum impression. I found it funny at first and was impressed with his accuracy. It was very good. But when he started talking to the bar staff with the voice, well, that was 2 hours I was never going to get back. Story 2. I once went on a date where the other person spent the entire dinner describing their elaborate coin collection and rating each coin's personality, then ended the night by asking if I would be interested in contributing to a rare coin fund. Not exactly the spark I had hoped for. Story 3. He arrived late and looked nothing like his pictures, appearing about 10 years older and quite a few kilograms heavier. He spoke over me and interrupted throughout the entire 20 minutes I endured the date. He would ask me about some of my favorite things, and when I answered, he told me why I was wrong about my choices. At the end of 20 minutes and my first drink, I told him I was finished. He said, "But if you don't have another drink, how will I drug you?" I told him never to contact me again, and he asked if we could share a taxi home. Story 4. We went to a nice coffee shop and were about maybe 5 minutes into the date when this obviously lonely and awkward older gentleman sat down next to us and said he couldn't help overhearing that she was a teacher. He proceeded to talk non-stop for almost an hour, and we kept just giving each other looks of stress and tried to politely tell him that it was our first date and we were trying to get to know each other. Well, that made him even more excited, and he wanted to stay to see how it went. Eventually, we just got up and said we needed to go. At least we had something funny to talk about on our walk after. Story 5. We were sitting at a sort of bench table in a restaurant. There were 2 extra spots next to us. Almost immediately, a couple came and asked if they could share the table. I hesitated, but my date, a woman, quickly said yes. It didn't take long for this new couple to quickly figure out that we were on a first date. They grew quiet, and I felt like they were listening in. I don't know if it was already a train wreck or if this condition actually helped things along, but now I felt like I needed to impress the girl and the 2 other people now at the table listening in. Anyway, I never saw that girl again, but I do remember the pizza was good. Story 6. I picked him up, as he was from Paris visiting the United States, and took us to the sushi restaurant he wanted to go to. He insisted on ordering for me, and he ordered a giant sushi boat, but said he hated sushi and ordered chicken for himself. It was unclear why he suggested we go for sushi if he hated it. The conversation was okay. When I went to drop him off, he proceeded to argue with me for a good 20 minutes or so about why I should have sex with him. It was all very strange. Story 7. We met at Jamba Juice, and he said he wanted to show me something in his car, and promised it wasn't his penis. We got in his car, and he said he could only show me the thing while driving. I made him promise again that it wasn't his private parts, and he pulled out of the parking lot. While we started driving around downtown, he pulled a cassette tape out of his pocket that he said he got at Goodwill for only $1, what a steal, put it in his stereo, pressed play, then said he had been practicing. It was a Learn How to Yodel cassette tape. He proudly told me that he was becoming a pretty good yodeler since he had been practicing every day. The guy on the cassette was doing his whole welcome to yodeling spiel before the yodeling started, and I was debating getting out of the car at the stoplight, but then my date started yodeling. So we were driving around the highly populated downtown with the windows wide open, and this man was yodeling his little heart out, only stopping every now and then to waggle his eyebrows at me in what I thought was an attempt at seduction. I was laughing because what was happening was quite unexpected. This was the most theater kid display I had ever seen. Then a bee flew in the window, and my date freaked out. He said he got in a car accident because of a bee the year before and started flailing around while yodeling, trying to get the bee out the window. In the process, he hit his thumb on the steering wheel, stopped yodeling, and started screaming about how much his thumb hurt. We were approaching a 3-way intersection with a green light, and he insisted his hand hurt too much to keep steering, then demanded I steer his car until it felt better. He then started yodeling sadly again. We were approaching the intersection and he still had his foot on the accelerator, and I didn't want to have an accident, so I leaned over and started steering while saying what was going on repeatedly. He was still cradling his injured thumb, croaking out the saddest yodels with his eyes mostly shut. We made it through the intersection, and I demanded he start steering his car and take me back to Jamba Juice. He said to wait because the yodel was almost done, and he needed to show me the end, but he grabbed the steering wheel again, so I allowed him to continue. The end of the yodel wasn't even that impressive, to be honest. Eventually, he wrapped up his performance, having seemingly forgotten about his thumb, and took me back to my car. I drove home in silence, only broken by me audibly asking myself what had just happened. Story 8. The worst date I had was with a guy who kept checking his phone. He kept saying he needed to get his mom's permission for everything, even picking the restaurant. Felt like I wasn't even there. I wanted to connect with him, but he seemed more worried about what she would think than about us. It was awkward and uncomfortable. Story 9. 5 minutes in, he asked me to remove my heels because he felt I was too tall. Then he spent the remainder of the time telling me how most women are sluts and whores. Needless to say, he did not enjoy my company. Story 10. I met a guy from Tinder at Taco Mac when I was 21. Let's call him Larry since I forgot his real name. He texted me 20 minutes early asking what I would like to drink, but I didn't see it until I walked in. It was no big deal, until I realized Larry was about 40 pounds heavier than his photos. I don't judge weight, but using years-old pictures is shady, especially since we'd exchanged snaps and I hadn't noticed a thing. When I sat down, Larry was already tipsy and annoyed because the bartender refused to let him order a drink for me before I arrived. He complained loudly about it, but I was more concerned he thought it was okay to order for me without asking. Kudos to the bartender for shutting that down. Larry, meanwhile, was a mess. He admitted he'd only had one drink but got drunk because he just donated plasma for cash and hadn't eaten. His friend, who was sitting across the restaurant, had dropped him off. Things got worse. Larry said he was hungry, and while I grabbed a menu, he started chatting with the guy 2 stools over. Larry asked what he was eating, a quesadilla, if it was good, and then if he could have some. To my shock, the guy gave him a huge piece, and Larry yelled for a plate and utensils before diving in. I was done. While Larry was busy talking to his new friend, I quietly asked the bartender for my check. She immediately understood. I paid, stood to leave, and Larry finally noticed. He asked why I was rushing off, and if he could have a goodbye kiss. I told him to forget it and left. He couldn't follow me because he still had to pay his bill. I blocked him before I even got to my car. Edit to add. At some point, he became very upset and angry at me after I casually mentioned that I'd never seen Casablanca. Story 11. I had a date once where we went to a Greek restaurant and then back to her place. She apparently got food poisoning and was in and out of the bathroom, eventually in a stupor, going in and out of sleep while constantly farting and burping. I didn't know anything about her, and her roommate was not there, so I stayed with her all night while this was going on. After about 4 hours, her roommate finally got home, and I left. After this, she was infatuated with me and stalked me for about a year. Story 12. She talked almost non-stop for 3 hours. She started to ask the same question 4 separate times and veered off topic every time. Near the end, when the waiter explained printer problems were holding up the check, I was picturing the foxes who chew off a leg to escape a trap. Women who have been on first dates with guys who only talked about themselves. I see and honor you. Story 13. When I moved into my new rental trailer, my landlord and his wife decided to set me up with one of their friends. I said sure, so we went on a double date. I am an animal professional of 20 years and love animals, big and small. They took me frog gigging, which, if you didn't know, is going out after dark to spear frogs on tridents to skin and cook later. The guy they set me up with tried to impress me by running up to a possum and kicking it with all his might into the forest. I was mortified. Story 14. I went on a date with a woman who pointed at the news anchor on the TV at the bar and yelled, "I'm hotter than her," and then looked at me and said, "Right." Story 15. My time to shine. Not only was this my worst date, it was my first date. I grew up pretty sheltered. I was a shy teenager and never really dated anybody. Once I was out on my own, back in the early days of internet dating, I made an OkCupid profile. I got a lot of obviously shady guys for a long time, and it eroded my confidence to the point that when one guy finally messaged me who actually spoke to me like a human being, I was over the moon and instantly wanted to meet up for a date. The guy didn't have any ideas on where to meet. I was new to the area, so somewhat at a loss myself. I loved ice skating though, and the local recreation center had an ice rink, so we could meet there. It was near his house, so it would be convenient for him. Okay, Cool. My best friend drops me off. I had no car at the time, had just left home, and I see that the recreation center is closed. Whoops, my bad. I call the guy who is late on my old flip phone, and he assures me it's no big deal and he's almost there. I wait around for a while, and just when I think he's not going to show, up strolls our hero, looking unkempt and distinctly pudgier than his profile picture. Now, as I had already stated, this was my first date ever. I was a late bloomer. I was not super pretty and had no illusions that I would be netting a great-looking guy, and my self-confidence was in the toilet for a myriad of reasons. Plus, I had not had enough harsh life experiences to teach me to be more guarded. Instead of bailing, I politely greet him and introduce myself. Our fine fellow is totally unbothered about the recreation center and wants to walk back to his house with me. He lives in a nearby subdivision. I was a stupid, inexperienced young woman at this point and just agreed to this with no issues. I started walking back with him and texted my best friend that I was walking to his place, and she immediately starts telling me that's a bad idea. I am paralyzed by the idea of being rude and judging him by his looks, so I decide to soldier on anyway. I am the chick that gets murdered in the horror movie at this point. He's a little weird. I gather as much on the walk to his place. I enter the house, a lamb to the slaughter. His living room is as disheveled as he is, and as we sit on the couch and I pick a movie for us to watch, Iron Man, haha, I ask about one couch section in particular that was upturned. Oh, I got drunk and lit that one on fire. Ha ha ha, okay. As we watch the movie, me being totally uncomfortable and him inching ever closer to me. He gets an arm around my shoulders, and at this point, I am internally screaming. He goes in for a kiss, and I turn my head at lightning speed, so he pecks my cheek instead and stand up, saying firmly, "No, I am not cool with that, we just met." He chills slightly but is still sending out severe creepy vibes, and thankfully at this point, his mother and stepfather come home. This was extremely funny in hindsight. I had no idea he lived with his parents, and his mom looked at first shocked to see a girl, and then over the moon delighted. She was so nice to me, practically ready to adopt me after knowing me for all of 2 minutes. And it was very obvious that this unfortunate woman had long resigned herself to the fact that her weirdo son was never going to actually get a girl. At this point, I excused myself to use the restroom and desperately texted my best friend that I needed a rescue operation. Call me in a couple of minutes to say that you need to pick me up now since you're my ride home. When I emerged from my suspiciously long bathroom break, my date uttered some more unhinged nonsense that I don't even remember anymore after so many years, and his mother harshly reprimanded him. My best friend soon called and bailed me out. It was awkward because the mother had a deep pain and sadness in her eyes as I speedily took off, knowing that any chance of her son settling down with a girlfriend anytime soon was running out the door too. Bless her. I hope that her son got over whatever he was going through and that she has 10,000 grandchildren now. So that was it. I didn't die. 3 out of 10 experience. Story 16. I went on a first date with a woman I met through online dating. I knew she was unemployed, and I don't judge. I didn't mind paying for drinks. But then she started telling me she had no food at home and asked if I would lend her money. Then she said, "I'm sure I can find some way to repay you." I had known this person for about 2 days and had spent around 30 minutes in person. I politely ended the date and let her know it wasn't going to work. Story 17. A former coworker wanted to set me up with one of her friends. I agreed and we met at a nightclub. I got her a few drinks, and afterward, she spent the rest of the evening talking about how she misses her ex-boyfriend and what made him a great guy. She told me reasons she should make up with him. At the end of the night, we cordially said goodbye, and she mentioned to me that she's going to go to her ex-boyfriend's house and make up with him. Story 18. We chatted online a little and set up a date. She said she lived in a funeral parlor and asked me to pick her up in the back lot. She wanted me to stop in at a bar for 5 minutes so she could talk to her friend and then wanted to go to my house. When we got to my place, she made a phone call, got in a fight with her mom and had to go home. I asked her what was up, and in a very relaxed, speakeasy voice, she said, "She thinks I'm on heroin." That's when I noticed her tiny pinhole pupils. She used me for a ride to score. Story 19. First date. I met her parents as they were in town at a restaurant, and they were calling me bucko and pressuring me to marry their daughter. We were sophomores in college. This was 20 years ago. I dodged a bullet,